On Thursday, April 11th, 1912, dawn broke at 5:15 a.m., Dublin Mean Time, the time to which Titanic's clocks had been set. After a windy night on the Irish Sea, when the sturdy packet boat tossed and tumbled to her heart's content, the lordly contempt of the Titanic for anything less than a hurricane seemed most marvelous and comforting. During the morning, when the full Atlantic swell came upon our port side, so stately and measured was the roll of the mighty ship that one needed to compare the moving of the side with the steady line of the clear horizon. Despite the restless waves, the fair skies and quiet optimism aboard foretold a pleasant day, hopeful even. But no one on Titanic could have known that as she prepared to leave Queenstown that evening, with Ireland fading into the horizon behind her, it would be the last time anyone on land would ever see her again. Francis Brown recalled getting up early that morning to make his way around Titanic with his camera in hand. He captured a lovely view of the sky as the sun rose through broken cloud cover. Then he took photos of passengers engaged in their morning activities aboard the ship, the wake washing out from the liner's starboard side as the liner sliced through the seas. One photograph captured a first-class passenger standing on the boat deck outside the gymnasium. Long identified as Jacques Futrelle, and indeed the resemblance is very strong, researcher Don Lynch and others have pointed out that a comparison of photographs in recent years reveals that this individual is in fact Percival White and not Futrelle. As he continued his tour of the ship, Brown stepped into the gymnasium and captured instructor Thomas Macaulay at the rowing machine just inside. He even got a snap of Harold Bride hard at work in the Marconi room. While it looked pleasant outside, second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley recalled that the wind was almost too cold to allow of sitting out on the deck on Thursday morning. Some people preferred to explore the ship's interior spaces, which were warmer. First-class passengers Jacques and May Futrelle were amongst those. They went over the whole ship exploring the liner's amenities. One thing that May noticed is that some workmen were still installing the doors to the first-class Café Parisien on B deck. Even at this stage, Titanic was still a work in progress. Elmer Taylor also took the opportunity to explore the ship with his friend Fletcher Williams and gave the following description of the ship's interiors. The ship as a whole revealed the result of generations of skill, labor, and ingenuity. By one means or another, engineered skill had stepped up travelers' comfort to an a la carte restaurant, Turkish electric and swimming baths, gymnasiums, squash racket courts, clothes pressing, clean and laundry, lounge, reception rooms, passenger elevators, palm court, electric heaters, real beds, not bunks, hot and cold running water, paneled white walls and ceiling, custom-made upholstered armchairs, wardrobes. Well, what else could one want? The brother of my esteemed friend Clarissa Smith had suggested it might be interesting to scrutinize the woodwork, paneling, carvings, etc. throughout the public rooms, the disposition of interior space and disguises used to create a home-like feeling, a hotel-like atmosphere, while getting away from steamer consciousness inside the ship and enhancing life at sea on decks. Williams and I nosed about. We were particularly impressed with a new type of davit, the apparent ease of launching lifeboats, accommodating as many as 80 people by simply turning a crank until the lifeboat was level with the deck, and additional assurance of efficiency in emergencies. A really great improvement over that old type davit which made it necessary to lift the lifeboat by rope tackle and shuttle it back and forth until it was in position to lower to the edge of the deck. We admired the especially designed, custom-made furniture, the floor coverings, wall decorations, palms and semi-tropical plants, the huge fat green pillows in the music room, etc. By late morning, the coast of Ireland appeared on the horizon ahead of the great steamship. Lawrence Beasley recalled, "The coast of Ireland looked very beautiful as we approached Queenstown harbor. The brilliant morning sun showing up on the green hillsides and picking out groups of dwellings dotted here and there above the rugged gray cliffs that fringe the coast." When Titanic reached the entrance to Queenstown harbor, the ship paused to rendezvous with the harbor pilot, and he clambered aboard. Under his careful direction, the ship ran slowly towards the harbor with the sounding line dropping all the time, and came to a stop well out to the sea, with our screws churning up the bottom and turning the sea all brown with sand from below. It was at about 11:30 a.m., according to Titanic shipboard clocks, when the liner finally ceased her forward progress and dropped anchor. She was about 2 miles from shore at the time. From the wharf at Queenstown, the two tenders, Ireland and America, had already taken their cue and begun their short journey to meet the Titanic. As the Titanic was slowing to a stop, the America was already approaching her from the starboard side. A gangway door on E-deck forward on the starboard side had been opened to facilitate the movement of passengers and mail. Another door on the port side forward was also opened. Meanwhile, the tender America circled around the ship and tied up along the liner's port side, while the Ireland tied up to starboard. While the tenders were alongside Titanic, First Officer Murdoch and Second Officer Lightoller were photographed, standing in the E-deck gangway doors with other crew members. A close look reveals that Lightoller's uniform sleeves still displayed 2 stripes, indicating his rank of First Officer prior to Chief Officer Wilde being transferred aboard for the maiden voyage, resulting in the reshuffling of ranks within the officer corps. Apparently, they did not have time to update their uniforms prior to the departure. Aboard the tenders were many sacks of mail bound for America, and a number of passengers set to board the liner. 3 first-class passengers, 7 second-class, and 113 immigrants traveling in third class. There were also a number of local port officials, journalists, and photographers who boarded the Titanic from the tenders. Crew and postal employees were also aboard to aid in the offloading of the Irish mails from the liner and to help her with mail bound for America. With the arrival of these third-class passengers on that afternoon, there was a fundamental shift in the makeup of the steer's passengers as a whole. Those who had embarked from Southampton were primarily comprised of English, French, Dutch, Italian, and other rather exotic nationalities. This made for an eclectic melting pot of languages and cultures. When all was said and done, after the exchange of passengers and the desertion by a single crewman at Queenstown, there were some 2,208 men, women, and children aboard the Titanic for the transatlantic trip. This number was divided among 891 members of the crew and officers, 324 first-class passengers, 284 in second class, and 709 in third class. The entire process of debarking and embarking passengers, cargo, and mail at Queenstown had taken about 2 hours. Shortly after 1:30 p.m., the liner raised anchor, telegraph bells from the bridge jangled, and her engines sprang to life once again. As the tenders pulled away and Titanic resumed her voyage, Eugene Daly, a third-class passenger who had just boarded the vessel, dressed in his kilt and full regalia, stood on the third-class promenade and played A Nation Once Again and Aaron's Lament on his uilleann pipes. He had mixed emotions about leaving his homeland. Second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley recalled of that moment that the tenders cast off at about 1:30 p.m., with the screws churning up the sea bottom again. The Titanic slowly turned through a quarter circle until her nose pointed down along the Irish coast. Titanic moved back out to the open sea, pausing one more time to allow the Queenstown pilot to disembark. New York Harbor lay over 2,000 miles to the southwest. The giant reciprocating engines were engaged at full ahead, and soon, the central turbine-driven propeller was also spinning away. Once the Titanic passed the Daunt's Rock light vessel at 1:55 p.m. ship's time, she had reached the official starting point of the transatlantic crossing. The Titanic then steamed parallel to the southern coast of Ireland for the next 55 nautical miles of her track. Soon, she was making 70 r.p.m. on the reciprocating engines, indicating a speed of about 20.7 knots. From Queenstown out, all of the firemen had been talking of the orders we had to fire her up as hard as we possibly could. We were to make as quick of a passage as possible. At about 2:30 p.m. ship's time, or some 35 minutes after passing Daunt's Rock lightship, she passed the old head of Kinsale at a distance of about 3 miles. Then she proceeded another 41 nautical miles to Fastnet Light, which marked the southwesternmost point of the Emerald Isle. Once she passed this famous landmark, at about 4:30 p.m., the Irish coastline began to fade in the distance astern. Titanic had reached the open Atlantic Ocean. Lawrence Beasley recalled, "All afternoon we steamed along the coast of Ireland, with gray cliffs guarding the shores, and hills rising behind, gaunt and barren. As dusk fell, the coast rounded away from us to the northwest, and the last we saw of Europe was the Irish mountains, dim and faint in the dropping darkness." As the sun began to set ahead of the liner's bow, the ship was aglow with light from stem to stern. The haunting strains of the ship's orchestra, playing cheerful music in a pre-dinner concert, drifted across the sea. Now that ports of call were falling ever farther behind the ship's wake, and there were no cross-channel passengers to disembark or fresh passengers to embark, the normal shipboard routine began to set in. Every morning, Captain Smith and his officers made a thorough inspection of the ship, according to White Star Line's policy. Chief Officer Wild had the 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock watch every morning and afternoon. Second Officer Lightoller followed him with the 6 to 10 watch every morning and night. Finally, First Officer Murdoch took the 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock watches every midday and night. Meanwhile, the ship's 6 lookout men were divided into 3 two-man teams, and each team served 4 two-hour watches in the crow's nest. Throughout all the other areas of the ship, the various crewmen formed up their watches and began to get into their routine. Passengers also began to fall into a routine. Although the 3 main meals were served to passengers every day, breakfast between 8 and 10 a.m., lunch at 1 o'clock p.m., and dinner at 7 o'clock p.m., it was really dinner that stood out as the centerpiece of daily activity. Before dinner, first-class passengers would gather in the reception room on D-deck at the foot of the grand staircase. Dressing for dinner was not required on the first night after the voyage began. However, on Thursday night and all subsequent nights, formal attire was always required. After socializing with friends or new shipboard acquaintances in the reception room, this throng of hungry individuals would next proceed through one of the 2 sets of double doors and enter the saloon itself. Once in the saloon, the passengers would make their way to their individual tables. As on all ocean liners, passengers were given table assignments in the saloon that they would maintain throughout the crossing. When the table companions consisted of old friends, mealtimes were sure to be friendly. Occasionally, passengers were dismayed to find themselves seated with fellow passengers who they considered dull, irksome, or outright dim-witted. Under such circumstances, many simply labored through each meal while praying for a quick, merciful end to the crossing. Another alternative, least aboard Titanic, was to take as many meals as possible in the first-class a la carte restaurant on B-deck. More often than not, however, passengers found their company pleasant and the dinner conversations at the very least cordial. If they did not know each other directly, table companions would frequently find that their social circles intertwined and they had mutual acquaintances. Purser Hugh McElroy had kindly given first-class passenger Eleanor Casimir a seat at his own large table in the dining saloon, which was for either 10 or 12 people. She found herself dining not only with McElroy, but also with ship surgeon Dr. William O'Loughlin, Assistant Surgeon John Simpson, 47-year-old New York stockbroker Harry Anderson, Harland & Wolff's Thomas Andrews, Frederick and Jane Hoyt, and Albert and Vera Dick. She sat on Dr. O'Loughlin's left side and directly across from Thomas Andrews. During the course of their mealtime conversation, Andrews mentioned that in certain ways, Titanic really wasn't ready to sail on this trip, yet they had proceeded because the pre-scheduled sailing date of April 10th arrived, and the ship simply had to sail on time. This made sense to Mrs. Casimir, and she said that she had noticed that none of the standard printed notices were in her cabin, although the frames were in place. Meanwhile, there were proving to be issues with climate control in some of the cabins. Second-class passenger Imanita Shelley continued to complain, chastising her cabin steward about the rooms being so cold. The steward responded, "There is a system of hot air flues through which the warmth is supposed to pass, and it does not get around. 3 passengers who have second cabins, where the hot air enters the system, are complaining that they are smothered and cannot stand the heat. All the rest are freezing, so there is something radically wrong." Others had complained about too much or too little heat in their cabins too. Apparently this was a bug that would need to be worked out following the maiden voyage, and it was no doubt proving something of a stress for Mr. Andrews and the other members of the Guarantee Group from Harland & Wolff. As was the usual custom aboard ship, every night after dinner there was a pull to bed on the ship's run for the next day. Male passengers would congregate in the smoking rooms and purchase one number from a range of mileage estimates for the next day's run, which was calculated every day at noon. This pastime was a highly popular one aboard ocean liners of the period. The betting was particularly keen on high-speed vessels which were out to take the blue ribbon. Before placing their wager, passengers were eager to obtain inside information on the subject from stewards, engineers, and officers that they came into contact with, all in the hopes of purchasing the most accurate figure. Although Titanic was not capable of making a blue ribbon winning crossing, it was expected that she would make a swift passage, and interest in the daily mileage runs was thus quite high. Eventually, passengers began to drift off to their cabins. Saloon stewards set about the nightly task of cleaning up the dining saloons and setting the tables for breakfast. Bakers worked through the night to prepare fresh bread and other goods for consumption the next day. Cabin stewards on night duty monitored their charges, waiting for the least sign that their assistance was required. Up on the bridge, the ship's officers and lookouts strained their eyes into the clear night ahead, ever vigilant despite the routine nature of their watches. Titanic steamed west through the night, her engines throbbing away with a reassuring constancy. The wind whistled through the rigging. Everything was quiet on the ship's first night on the Atlantic Ocean. At midnight that night, the ship's public area clocks on the magnetic circuit were set back to 11:01 p.m. This 59-minute adjustment was made in order to agree with local time at the ship's anticipated position at noon the following day. In order to share the time change between the various crewmen, the setback was further divided between 2 watches, 29 minutes in the first watch and 30 minutes in the second watch. As Titanic continued her journey across the Atlantic, the crossing had settled into a smooth rhythm, steady and calm after the chaotic departure on April 10th. The mood aboard was pleasant and optimistic. Another beautiful day at sea was just over the horizon.
A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon: NikkiChan92, Evan Fleming, Lucas Sidlowski, Bluebird Nut, Mark Gegenheimer, Martin Cahill, Maximilian Metcalf, Rachel Warner Sanchez, and Snow Monkey.